Hello, South Texas, North American missionaries. Great to be with you. Thank you, Brother Nishi, for asking me to do this video. I give honor to Brother Plant, the whole North American missions team. Y'all are doing a great job in South Texas, and we're glad to be a part of what you're doing today. I've been given the subject to talk on family, church planners' family, and I've been given about 20 minutes to do it. So that's quite a challenge. But let's talk about some principles that you need to keep in mind as you plan a church in regards to family. It is up to you to set your priorities, and I'm thankful that over the last 20 years or so, we've done a better job of teaching the issue of priorities. There was a generation that didn't do as well, and they had the mistaken notion that if they put the work of God first, that somehow their family would be taken care of. Well, there's a distinct difference between your relationship with God and the work of God. And so, in case you haven't heard, here's the order that your priorities, of course, I don't have a list of everybody's priorities down to 50 points, but everybody's top 4 priorities should look something like this. God first, then your family, then the church, and then your work, occupation. Now, you may say, well, why is God 1 and church is 3? Aren't they the same? No. Your relationship with God does require some church attendance, okay? You can't have a relationship with God without the church being involved. But in this context, I'm talking about your personal relationship with God. Forget that you're a preacher. What would it take for you to serve God? Well, you have to pray, you have to fast, you have to read the Word, you have to be involved in a church and submitted to leadership. These are the building blocks of our walk with God. And so, unfortunately, sometimes the minister can forget that he has to pray not just about the sermon he's going to preach on Sunday, but he has to talk to God and still have a relationship with God other than God just being your boss. Now, I don't mean to be lighthearted about that. I recall a particular time in my church planning life where you're bivocational, you're working hard on a job over here. When I started planting churches, I had 3 small kids. They were 7 and under. And I was busy and terrified, right? I was terrified. I was going to be unsuccessful, putting my personal finances and everything. And I just noticed that I was neglecting prayer. And it bothered me once I realized what I was doing because I was running out of time, right? And so I was equating I'm studying for a sermon is the same as my personal devotion, and it wasn't. And so then I began to really think deeply about why am I neglecting prayer? Why am I doing that? And I discovered internally that I had begun to see Jesus as my boss instead of as my friend and as my Savior. And I was already as busy as I could be. The last thing I wanted to do is go sit down with the boss and get more instructions. And I had to make a shift in my spirit. And I was, of course, horrified when I realized I had been putting Jesus in that context. But you have to keep that separate. God loves me. He's concerned about me. I can go talk to Him about my stresses, even though some of my stressing is coming from the work that I'm doing for Him. Someone once said to me, don't get so busy with the work of God that you forget the God of the work. And of course, then it's your family. church planter, let me tell you, it won't matter how big a church you build, how beautiful the building is. If your family's not saved, it'll all be empty to you. It'll all be empty to you. You cannot overestimate the importance of making sure that you've done a good job as a dad, as a mom, because those are the things that last. You may not be in this city more than 10 years, 15 years, even if you're there for 30 years. One day you're going to be old, and it's going to be your kids that are going to take care of you. That is the number one thing. In all the pressure, don't forget that. And the third is church. And by church in this context, I'm not talking about minimal attendance and being under the authority of the church. I'm talking about your work for the church. Even a saint of God. You can never allow the church to become detrimental to the family. And you can program a church so much that you're hurting your leaders' families because they're not able to spend time with their family. You can't get so caught up in church work that you neglect your prayer time or your family time. And of course, then your occupation, and for a minister, this is a different work for the church, right? So I'm working at world headquarters. I'm out doing all things. That's my job. But I have a local church that I attend as well. And so I have minimal church attendance requirements. And then I also have things that I want to do as a volunteer for the church. But all those two things are separate from my work in the ministry. And so church planter, you have to go to church, and your family needs to go to church. And then there are certain things you're just going to volunteer to do for the church, not because it's your job, but because it's your community. And then there are other things you do because it's your job, okay? You're getting paid to work at the church. And you have to separate a task into what third of this. Is this my basic commitment to God? Does this fall under God? Or does this fall under my volunteerism for my church and my being involved in mission? Or is this what I get paid to do? And you need to be able to have a good handle on that. Think of your family as your church planting team. There's nobody more committed to you than your spouse. That's your top leader. Your children. Even if they're too young to actually do anything, they're your future leaders. You better be pouring into them to develop them. But in many cases, they're your first musicians. They're your first ushers. They'll be your Sunday school teachers. In my case, both my sons grew into musicians. My daughter ran the Sunday school department. They became great. Well, if I want great leaders, I need to mentor them. So you need to be mentoring your children. They're the first people you pastor. How can you be a good pastor to others if you're not a good pastor to your family? Your family is not just hired labor, unpaid labor they would be. They're not just people for you to work. They're not slaves. They're your saints. And so at least look at them that way. You need to teach your family a Bible study. What a terrible thing it would be if you taught everybody else's kids in the church Bible studies, taught everybody Bible study, but your own kids grow up not knowing the Word. Have family devotion. Teach them a Bible study. Church planting is good for kids. Don't let anybody tell you that church planting is not good for kids. You keep your priorities straight. You keep God first, family second, church third, and separate your work for God from your relationship with God. And as you example that to your kids, church planting is good for your kids. They get excited about it. Don't talk about the negative stuff in front of your kids. There's negative stuff with anything you do. There's negative stuff if you're pastoring a church of 2,000. There's negative stuff if you are a world headquarters executive. There's negative stuff Don't talk about it to your kids. Your kids should think everybody in that church is perfect. You and your wife need to talk about it. Perhaps strategize, make sure the kids are not listening to it. Because you're going to forgive those people, and you're going to go on, but then your kids are left with all that baggage. Don't do it. Have a good attitude about church planning. It never works out. People who always feel persecuted because they're planting a church and they're talking about how bad it is and how tough it is. Your family can't handle that. It brings an atmosphere in. You have been privileged to do what you do. There's advantages they have. If they were in a larger church, they wouldn't be able to take up the offering. They wouldn't be able to participate in all of these things. So highlight the advantages of it and make sure, listen to your kids talk. Are they saying positive things about church planning? Are they excited about being involved? Are they excited when a new person comes? Listen. And if you don't like what you hear, then change what you're saying, because they're going to repeat what they're hearing. My wife's going to come on the video here in just a minute. She's going to talk to you. But I want to tell you one of the best thing I did for my family as a church planner. And let me just say, I was a church planner for 25 years. And I raised my family. They've never known anything but church planning. And they're doing well. And I did not lose my family planning churches. Let me say this. I recognized that I was a workaholic. I recognized I love the work of God. I loved working. Men, we get our self-worth from our jobs many times. And I'm no different than any other man. And I love to work. And so I recognize that about myself, and I recognize that I would probably have a tendency to neglect my family. But I knew my wife had a better handle on that than I did. And husbands, many times your wives has a much better grasp on the health of your kids and your family. They've got, Gary Smalley used to say, a lady has a built-in marriage manual. And we know mothers have a built-in child-raising manual. God put that in them. And so I decided to submit to my wife. You know, before that passage in Ephesians says, wives, submit to your husbands, it says submit to one another. And I decided I would submit to my wife in the area of my family. If she said I needed to spend more time with my kids, then there was no argument. And that didn't mean I didn't argue on the inside, okay? But I made a covenant not to argue on the outside. Just say, yes, I need to do that. And so I remember distinctly one day, I was driving home from the office, and I got a call from this teenager, and I was trying to win his parents, disciples' parents who were already in the church, but I knew he was the key to that family, and he wasn't doing that good, and I'd spent tons of time with him. But he called me up and he said, hey, Pastor, I'd like to get with you this evening. Do you have time? Well, I was headed home from the office to have supper with the family, but in my zeal, I'm like, oh, man, finally, this guy's reaching out to me. I'm not having to reach out to him. This is going to be a great thing. This is a God moment, you know. So I said, sure, Sean, I'll meet you at Pisano's in about 30 minutes. Okay, that sounds great. So I picked up the phone. I called Karla, and I said, babe, sorry, but I'm not going to be able to be there for supper. Sean called, and he wants to meet with me, so I'm going to go meet him. And the phone went kind of silent, you know. And I was expecting her to say, oh, that's great. You mean he called you? Wow, that's awesome. You better go jump on that hot opportunity. But she didn't say anything. I'm like, hello? She said, what you really need to do is come home and eat dinner with your own kids. She said, you hadn't eaten dinner with them in 3 nights, and you need to be here. And she said, beside that, Sean's not listening to you. Well, I'm sitting there going, but I made a covenant with myself. And I said, okay, I'll call Sean. I'll be home in a few minutes. And hung up with her, called Sean, said, hey, Sean, something come up. I can't meet you. Let's reschedule. You know, Sean never did reschedule that meeting, and he wasn't listening to me. And I did wind up losing that family. But you know what? I didn't neglect my kids over it. And I'd have lost them anyway. That meeting that night would not have changed the story. And I'm glad I listened. And so that's my advice to you, is keep your priorities straight. And if it's not your wife that can bring balance to you, have a trusted pastor that could. I had a man in my life named William H. Nix that watched me very carefully and made sure that I made Karla and my kids a priority. And he passed away in November, but I'll be forever grateful for his influence in my life. Listen to people. You're not the best judge of this, okay? And so listen to others. The video you're about to see of my wife was made in the height of the pandemic last year. She did it for our church planners, and we're still facing some large challenges in this pandemic that are unique. And so listen as she shares her heart with you.
Hello, North American missionaries. We just want you to know that we love you and we're thinking about you during this strange time that we're going through. You are some of the best people on the planet, and you have God's heartbeat, and we are praying for you right now. I'm just going to speak a few minutes about keeping a healthy marriage. Obviously, our marriages are under major attack during this period of time because of all the extra stress that's coming against us, and we just need to be reminded of some things about marriage that will help us through this time. I want to read a scripture, Ephesians 4, verse 1 through 3. As a prisoner for the Lord, then, I urge you to live a life worthy of the calling you have received. Be completely humble and gentle. Be patient, bearing with one another in love. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. One of the best things you can do to have a healthy marriage is to be a healthy Christian. My husband and I have been married for 32 years now. And many times when we've had our disagreements, most of the time they were solved by looking within ourselves and making sure we were doing our best to be like Jesus. Do we always get to that point right away? No, but we keep striving to get there. Be aware of who you're fighting. As a church planting couple, so many times we are in a spiritual warfare, but feel like we are in war with each other. Be aware of this, because this is what Satan wants. He wants to cause strife and division because he can fight you that way. That's one way he knows he can get to you. There have been times that we have been in the middle of a struggle but realized, wait a minute, this is not just us fighting each other. This is not us just having a disagreement. This is a spiritual attack, and we have to be together, not against each other. Ecclesiastes 4, 9 through 12 says, 2 are better than 1 because they have a good return for their labor. If either of them falls down, one can help the other up. But pity anyone who falls and has no one to help them up. Also, if 2 lie down together, they will keep warm. But how can one keep warm alone? Though one may be overpowered, 2 can defend themselves. A cord of 3 strands is not quickly broken. Be a team, be one in the Spirit, and be one with each other. Be each other's biggest fan and each other's best friend. No one can build your spouse up or tear your spouse down more quickly or better than you can. Back to being a Christian. We need to build our husband or our wife up. We need to be their biggest cheerleader. No one will have his or her back better than you. Do this until it becomes second nature. You all are one. If you're hurting him or her, you're hurting yourself. 1 Thessalonians 5:11 says, therefore, encourage one another and build each other up. And finally, choose to love. Marriage is a wonderful thing. It's full of ups and downs. It's full of joys and sorrows. It's full of such fulfillment. There's so many things in life that is so fulfilling in a marriage, but you never know what changes may come in your life or your circumstances. But the one thing that is constant and is that every day you choose love and you choose your spouse. It's a choice to love. 1 Peter 4:8 says, above all, love each other deeply, because love covers a multitude of sins. John 15, my command is this, love each other as I have loved you. When you are planning a church, remember, you are reproducing what you are, not what you want to be. And when you love each other, that translates to loving people in your church, and they can feel that love. Love each other as Christ loves us. We're praying for you all. God bless. We love you.